Have you ever felt that the more deeply you think, the more disconnected you become? That the more you question, the more distant you feel from the people around you? If so, you're not alone. Throughout history, society has always struggled to accept those who think beyond the surface. Socrates was sentenced to death for challenging the beliefs of his time. Galileo was silenced for revealing truths that threatened authority. Nikola Tesla, despite his brilliance, died in isolation, his ideas dismissed until long after his passing. These were not just brilliant minds, they were individuals who saw the world differently, and for that, they were feared, rejected, and ignored. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers in history, believed that intelligence is not a gift, it's a burden. A curse that isolates those who see the world too clearly. According to him, the more a person understands, the harder it becomes to connect with others, because intelligence reveals truths that most people would rather not face. But why does this happen? Why does deep thinking often lead to loneliness? And if intelligence is such a burden, how can those who possess it navigate the world without losing themselves? By the end of this video, you'll understand the hidden curse of intelligence, how society reacts to deep thinkers, and most importantly, how to survive in a world that doesn't always welcome those who see too much. Have you ever noticed how people react differently to different kinds of superiority? When someone is physically strong, they are admired. Strength is seen as a trait that can be respected, even celebrated. When someone is wealthy, others might envy them, but they still accept their success. After all, money can be earned, and fortune can be pursued. But when it comes to intelligence, something different happens. Instead of admiration, there is resistance. Instead of acceptance, there is discomfort. Why? Because intelligence does not just introduce new ideas, it holds up a mirror, forcing others to confront their own limitations. This is what psychologists call the mirror effect. When someone encounters a deep thinker, they are not just listening to their words, they are being reminded, even if only subconsciously, of what they don't know. And for many, that realization is unsettling. Human identity is built on beliefs, about the world, about society, and most importantly, about ourselves. When new information challenges these beliefs, it creates cognitive dissonance, a mental conflict between what we believe and the possibility that we might be wrong. Instead of embracing change, most people instinctively resist. They reject the new idea, not because it lacks truth, but because accepting it would mean questioning a part of their identity. This is why intelligence often leads to social discomfort. A deep thinker, simply by existing, becomes a silent challenge to those around them. Not by being arrogant. Not by being dismissive. But simply by seeing things differently in a world that prefers certainty over truth. Science confirms what many deep thinkers have felt their entire lives: intelligence can be intimidating. Studies show that when people feel intellectually inferior, their brain's amygdala, the center responsible for processing fear, activates. In other words, intelligence doesn't just challenge beliefs, it triggers a primal response, the same one we experience when facing physical danger. But why would intelligence be perceived as a threat? The answer lies in evolution. For most of human history, survival depended not on thinking independently but on fitting into the group. Early humans thrived in tribes where conformity meant security. Challenging the status quo wasn't seen as intelligence, it was seen as rebellion, and rebellion could get you exiled or worse. Even today, this instinct remains. Society still prioritizes cohesion over intellectual depth. In workplaces, social circles, and even families, agreement is often valued more than truth. People seek belonging over knowledge because their minds are wired to avoid isolation. This is why deep thinkers are often misunderstood or even rejected. Not because they are wrong, but because their presence alone disrupts the balance. They challenge what others take for granted, and that, to the tribal mind, is a threat. Arthur Schopenhauer saw intelligence not as a blessing, but as a burden, one that isolates those who see the world too clearly. At the core of his philosophy was the concept of the will, the invisible force that drives all human behavior. Most people, Schopenhauer argued, live by the will to live, seeking comfort, pleasure, and survival. They are drawn to what feels good: relationships, entertainment, and social validation. Their lives revolve around external gratification, avoiding discomfort whenever possible. But intelligent people? They develop something different: the will to truth. Instead of chasing pleasure, they chase understanding. Instead of avoiding discomfort, they confront it. They seek meaning beyond what society offers, exploring philosophy, self-awareness, and the depths of human existence. This fundamental difference creates an unbridgeable gap between deep thinkers and society. Where most people find meaning in distractions, intellectuals see through them. Small talk feels empty. Social validation feels meaningless. Even relationships can feel superficial if they lack depth. This is why intellectuals often feel detached from everyday life. They aren't just disinterested in common pursuits, they are wired differently. Society, in turn, struggles to embrace those who think deeply. It doesn't reward those who seek truth, it rewards those who make others feel good. Leaders who say what people want to hear gain more influence than those who challenge the norm. Charisma wins over wisdom. Comfort wins over truth. And so, the deep thinker is left standing at the edges of society, seeing reality for what it is, but often alone in their understanding. Throughout history, society has had a consistent pattern: reject first, celebrate later. The greatest minds, the ones who dared to think differently, were not welcomed in their time. Instead, they were silenced, ridiculed, or ignored. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth simply because he encouraged people to question authority and think for themselves. His crime? Asking uncomfortable questions. Galileo, the man who proved that the earth revolves around the sun, was declared a heretic. His discoveries challenged religious dogma, and for that, he was imprisoned and forced to deny his own findings. Nietzsche, whose ideas would later reshape philosophy, was dismissed as insane. His critiques of morality and societal norms were too radical, too unsettling, for the world of his time. And then there's Nikola Tesla, a genius who revolutionized technology, yet died in poverty. His vision of free energy threatened those in power, so he was cast aside while others profited from his ideas. What do all these figures have in common? They saw the world differently before the world was ready to accept their vision. Today, they are celebrated as pioneers. But in their time, they were outcasts. This pattern is not just a relic of history, it continues today. Society resists those who think deeply, not because they are wrong, but because they challenge the way things are. If you have ever felt rejected for thinking differently, know this: you are not alone. You are simply experiencing the same resistance that every deep thinker in history has faced. The world may not understand you now, but history shows that it never understands visionaries until it's too late. Society doesn't just reject intelligence out of fear, it's wired to resist it. Deep thinkers don't just challenge ideas, they challenge the way people see themselves, and the human mind is designed to protect itself from that kind of discomfort. The Dunning-Kruger effect explains part of the problem. Those with low intelligence or limited knowledge tend to overestimate their own understanding. They believe they know more than they do. Meanwhile, those with true intelligence often second-guess themselves, constantly questioning, analyzing, and refining their understanding. This creates an ironic reality: those who know the least often speak with the most confidence, while those who truly understand the complexities of the world hesitate, knowing how much there is left to learn. Then there's the backfire effect: when people are confronted with facts that contradict their deeply held beliefs, they don't change their minds. Instead, they double down, defending their position even more aggressively. The reason? Admitting they were wrong feels like an attack on their identity. Intelligence doesn't just present new information, it forces people to question everything they've built their worldview upon. And that is something most people refuse to do. Finally, the status quo bias, the psychological tendency to prefer familiar ideas over complex or uncomfortable truths. Society thrives on stability, predictability, and the belief that things are as they should be. Deep thinkers disrupt that. They introduce ideas that challenge the norm, forcing people to confront the flaws in the world around them. And when faced with the choice between comfort and truth, most people will choose comfort, no matter how false it may be. This is why deep thinkers so often find themselves on the fringes of society. Not because they are wrong, but because they make people uncomfortable. Their intelligence doesn't just reveal the truth, it exposes the illusions that others would rather keep believing. If you've ever felt like your thoughts isolate you, understand this: you are not alone, and you are not broken. Intelligence has always been a double-edged sword. It grants clarity, but it also sets you apart. Not everyone will understand you, and that's okay. The first step is acceptance: Not everyone wants to engage in deep conversations, and not everyone is ready to question their beliefs. Instead of forcing connections that don't align, seek out like-minded individuals, through books, online communities, and intellectual circles where depth is appreciated rather than feared. But just as important is knowing when to engage and when to observe. Not every conversation needs to be a philosophical debate. Not every moment calls for deep analysis. Choose your battles wisely. Sometimes, the smartest response is silence. Schopenhauer had a clear message for deep thinkers: embrace solitude as a privilege, not a punishment. The world may not always value depth, but that doesn't mean you should suppress it. True intelligence isn't about convincing others, it's about understanding yourself. Find peace in self-awareness rather than seeking validation from those who may never understand your perspective. Intelligence may set you apart, but it also gives you something most people never attain: clarity, depth, and freedom. And throughout history, it's deep thinkers who have shaped the future, even if society doesn't recognize them in the present. Deep thinkers aren't rejected because they're wrong, they're rejected because they challenge comfort. They see what others choose to ignore. They ask the questions most people would rather leave unanswered. And that has always made society uneasy. If you've ever felt misunderstood for thinking deeply, know that you're not alone. The world may not always embrace deep thinkers, but history has shown that they are the ones who push humanity forward. What about you? Have you ever faced rejection for being a deep thinker? Let's talk in the comments. Your experiences matter. And if you want more insights from history's greatest minds, hit that subscribe button. The journey of self-awareness never ends, and together, we'll continue exploring the truths that shape the world.